Today is February the 1st. We'll look at a story in the book of Judges of the death of a good man. Who was it? Let's find out together. So in Judges chapter 2, starting in verse 6, we read these words. After Joshua sent the people away, each of the tribes left to take possession of the land allotted to them. And the Israelites served the Lord throughout the lifetime of Joshua and the leaders who outlived him, those who had seen all the great things the Lord had done for Israel. Joshua, son of Nun, the servant of the Lord, died at the age of 110. So we see a very simple story here, the story of the death of Joshua. Joshua, who had led Israel now for 4 or 5 years, he had helped them conquer the land of Palestine. So who was Joshua? It's interesting to look and just see the development of this man. The first time that we see him mentioned is in the book of Exodus, Exodus chapter 17. After Israel left Egypt, they began to confront nations, or rather nations confronted them. Nations that didn't want this large number of slaves walking through their land. One of the first that they came up against was Amalek. In Exodus chapter 17, verse 9, Moses commanded Joshua, choose some men and go and fight the army of Amalek for us. The story goes on. The next day, Moses stood on the hill, raised his arm as long as his arms were raised. Joshua's army would defeat Amalek, but when Moses got tired and lowered his arm, Amalek would defeat Israel. So Aaron and Hur stood beside Moses and took turns keeping his arms raised, and Joshua prevailed. The first time we see Joshua, he was a military man. He led the army of Israel against their enemies. The next time we see him, Exodus chapter 24. Now, Moses has gone up Mount Sinai and received the law. In Exodus chapter 24, verse 13, Moses and his assistant Joshua set out, and Moses climbed up the mountain of God. No real mention of Joshua between those two episodes, but what we find out is in that time, Joshua had become the personal assistant of Moses. A few chapters later, Exodus chapter 33, in verse 11, inside the tent of meeting, the Lord would speak to Moses face to face as one speaks to a friend. The tabernacle had been constructed. God would come and would meet with Moses, but that's not where the verse ends. Afterward, Moses would return to the camp, but the young man who assisted him, Joshua, son of Nun, would remain behind in the tent of meeting. Joshua had a time in which he also had personal communion with God. In the book of Numbers, we see Joshua mentioned now in a new light. Numbers chapter 13, as the Israelite people sort of wandered in the wilderness to the east of the River Jordan, they sent 12 men to scout out the land, scouts to come back and report what the land was like. One of those men, Hosea, whom Moses called Joshua. Exodus chapter 13, verse 16. Joshua was one who went in to scout out the land. When the scouts came back, they told Israel, the land's beautiful, but the people are too strong for us. 10 of them said, we shouldn't try. 2 of them, Caleb and Joshua, said, our God is bigger than anything that we'll encounter in Palestine. The people at that point actually tried to kill Caleb and Joshua. They took them apart, tried to stone. Numbers 14:10, the whole community began to talk about stoning Joshua and Caleb. Then the glorious presence of the Lord appeared to all the Israelites at the tabernacle. God himself came and protected Joshua. Numbers chapter 27, and then again in the book of Deuteronomy, we see that Joshua was set apart by God. Numbers 27, verse 18. The Lord said, take Joshua, son of Nun, who has the Spirit in him. Lay your hands on him. Present him to Eleazar the priest before the whole community and publicly commission him to lead the people. In the book of Deuteronomy, Moses does just that. Joshua is taken before the priest, and the priest anoints him as the new leader of Israel. Joshua chapter 1, verse 2. The Lord appears to Joshua and says, Moses, my servant, is dead. Therefore, the time has come for you to lead these people, the Israelites, across the Jordan River into the land that I'm giving them. Joshua, in his lifetime, went all the way from being a slave in Egypt to leading Israel into the land. Joshua's name, it means Jehovah saves. Joshua experienced that in his lifetime. By the time Joshua was ready to die, Israel was a nation, and it was conquering the land that God had promised to them. So in the book of Judges, chapter 2, in verse 8, we read of Joshua's death. In verse 9, they buried him in a land that he had been allocated at Timnath-Serah in the hill country of Ephraim, north of Mount Gosh. Joshua was born a slave. He died a landowner. Joshua was born subject to others' authority. When he died, he was the leader, had all authority in Israel. Joshua was a great man. We just read a bit here about his death. Scripture treats it very simply, very plainly. Joshua died and was buried. But there's so much more behind those words, isn't there? No matter what your age, what do you want written on your epitaph? What do you want on your tombstone? I'd love to have something like what's written here about Joshua. Throughout the lifetime of Joshua and the leaders who outlived him, the Israelites served the Lord. Those who had seen all the great things the Lord had done for Israel. You see, Joshua simply led. God did the great things. Joshua simply led and prepared Israel. What a great epitaph. If you like what you've listened to, please share it with your friends. Go to whatever engine you use to listen to this devotional. Be sure to like it or follow it. If you have any questions or comments, email me at questions@becomehope.com. Tomorrow, we'll continue looking at the downward spiral of events in the book of Judges. Join us tomorrow, and let's find out together.